Hello everyone, welcome back to Dev by Design. We are at the end of several weeks where we have been really focused on color, talking about kind of the psychology of color and using color effectively in your designs, what to do, what to avoid. Today, we are going to lean a little bit more into the development side of Dev by Design. Usually we're pretty heavily focused on the design side. Today, we're going to keep things a little bit devier. We're going to be talking about the future of color in CSS, talking about P3 colors specifically and the ways that we will soon be able to write colors, the multiple ways that we'll be able to write and define P3 colors in CSS. So definitely stick around. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, as I mentioned, over the last few weeks, we've really taken a deep dive into foundations of color. A lot of that has had us looking at information that might have felt kind of new to you in terms of how we were looking about it, but not necessarily like a new discovery. So things like color theory, color wheel, connections between colors and emotions. All of this is stuff that artists and designers have been making use of for centuries now. And while we can absolutely apply all that existing knowledge to the work that we do today, and in fact, we have spent probably the last 4 or 5 weeks talking about just that, as a developer, I also can't help but be attracted to what is new and what is shiny in the world of development. And there is a lot of stuff that is new and shiny on the horizon when it comes to how we're handling colors in CSS. So let's start by kind of taking a look at the past. As we've always kind of known, the way that colors are represented on a monitor does not really reflect like the full width and breadth of what we can see just with our eyes. As always, art is kind of limited by the technology of the time. In earlier days, that meant restrictions on like what dyes and what paints were expensive to produce and how much things cost to print. Similarly, we saw like computers in the early days were really limited to that iconic like green text on a black background. And that had to do with just the display technology and the limitations of the time. Those displays used phosphor, and green phosphor was the brightest, and it had the longest afterglow, which helped to like disguise the refresh rates on those early monitors. So it reduced that feeling of like flickering or like refreshing because the green had that like afterglow effect with our eyes. We talked about that a little bit with vibrating colors the other week, where really bright colors kind of linger in our eyes. So early monitors kind of took advantage of that to hide the way that the screens had to be refreshing. And also, like if you've been doing web design or web dev for a while, you probably remember the era of like web safe colors. That's something we thankfully have not had to worry about for a long time. But in early kind of web dev days, we were limited to like, I want to say it was like 200 or like 220, 215 colors that were considered web safe. Let me see if I can find, let me Google things. Here, Google with me. Yeah. If you did any web development early on, yeah, here we go, 216. So I kind of danced around the right number, but didn't quite get there. It used to be that there were 216 colors that could be consistently displayed across all major web browsers. And they were these 216 colors. So you were pretty limited in terms of what you could use and what could reliably be seen. They tended to err mostly on a brighter side. So you can see, here's another good shot of all of them. There was a lot of these kind of neons and a lot of these really bright colors that kind of influenced the color decisions that were being made at the time. So yeah, there's another shot, web safe colors. It was interesting. Interesting to design with those limitations. But as monitors evolved, more and more colors have been made available, and so we have access to more and more. And that's kind of hint what we're going to talk about today, because we're on the edge of seeing another broadening of that spectrum of colors that we can use. But for now, let's talk about the way things work currently. So, and to do that, we're going to talk about writing RGB colors. The way that we are used to writing RGB colors also has a lot to do with the limitations of the time when they were created. So, for instance, did you know that the reason RGB colors are defined on a scale from 0 to 255 is because a color is stored in 3 bytes of data, one for red, one for green, one for blue. Actually, let me share my screen again because there's a helpful visual for this. There it is. So if we were to take this all the way back to like the binary, we'd see that each one of those is like, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's why when we define RGB colors, it's like, all zeros for black and then like all ones for white. It's either all on or all off. So when we convert from binary to decimal, that number of like, I think it's like 7 ones converts to 255. So when we're defining our RGB colors, we're really telling each one of these kind of sub-pixels in an RGB display what binary value we want it to take. But it's a lot faster and easier for us to write them in the decimal value shorthand, which is what's led to that 255. It's kind of cool, right? Like, I think it's one of those things that we all vaguely know, is that like all of this is ones and zeros in the end. But it's always kind of cool when you get to break it down and see like exactly how that happens. But as I hinted about before, today we are seeing the shift from like LCD to OLED screens, which opens up a whole new array of displayable colors for our usage. So kind of in the same way that we made that shift from like web safe colors to like the full RGB spectrum, today we're seeing a shift from RGB to this new color set that's known as P3 colors. It's about 50% larger than our current RGB color set, which is pretty cool. And it leans towards kind of more brighter and more vibrant colors. So that's kind of where we'll see the shift. But we also know that it won't be the last one. So here, this graphic shows kind of a spectrum. So the whole thing is what's available to our eye. Like if we're just looking at things in the real world, this is the spectrum of color that's available to us. Obviously, once you get out into here, all these colors in this graphic start to look the same because we don't have the tech to display them. So we're like, great, look at all of this same color green. No, if we were looking at it in the real world, we'd be able to see a broader spectrum. But here, this kind of light yellow triangle here is the current spectrum of colors that we can define right now using RGB. This next orange triangle here, the one that's like just a bit bigger, kind of all the way around, those are the P3 color set that's coming to us soon. But we also know that's not the last one. Obviously, with all of this, there's more colors yet to be seen. The human eye is capable of seeing way more colors than we can currently represent on screens, even like super fancy OLED screens. This set out here that is even beyond the P3 colors is this Rec 2020. And that's, you can see it, it's in use a little bit right now. You can see it on like 4K ultra high def TVs. Although even a bunch of those still only support like 90 to 95% of that Rec 2020 range. So we kind of know that it's coming and we're seeing it in some tech, mostly more like film and video tech, but eventually it will come to web design and web development as well, because that's just how these things work. Eventually, computer monitors will be just as good as those 4K UHD TVs, and then we'll have to start writing colors for them. The important thing to take away here from this is that this P3 spectrum of colors is the next, but not the last color set that's available to us as developers, which meant that it was really important for us to kind of re-look at the CSS that we have right now, the way that we write colors right now, and define a new color syntax that could grow with us. The RGB model, unfortunately, is just too limited to use with P3 colors. We can't write these new colors the way that we're used to writing RGB colors. It's just not broad enough. So what we've been referring to as RGB colors moving forward will be known as sRGB. You might have seen that thrown around a little bit. I'm starting to see it more commonly in use, but we'll see it for sure in use once we have the CSS to support. That S just stands for standard, so standard RGB. We might also start to see reference to wide gamut color support, which is just a quick and easy way to say able to support more than RGB. It's kind of a like bucket term for whatever's next. And that means P3, means Rec 20, means whatever's after Rec 20, wide gamut out in here. So it is possible to like automatically convert colors from sRGB to P3, but when we're talking about doing that like with some kind of an algorithm or some kind of like an automatic adjustment, it can distort the colors a little bit from what a designer might have intended. So ideally, developers and designers will define the color that they actually want in CSS, not limited to the sRGB color model. They'll be able to write exactly what they want and not have to worry about whether the computer is like scaling it up or adjusting it correctly. They can just write the color that they want. So there are a couple new options that are on the way for defining these P3 colors right now. They're all from the CSS color module level 4. They're not available for you to start writing with right now. They are coming in the future, but I think it's something that's really cool. So we're going to take a look at it. That's what we're going to dive into today. So the first of these options, it looks like this. We see color, display P3, and then 3 kind of numeric options for us to write in, right? So we start by specifying that color display type, display P3. That could also be display sRGB or Rec 2020. Then those 3 numbers are like an updated version of how we used to define sRGB color. So it's still red, green, and blue, but instead of maxing out at 255, it's now going to just function on a scale from 0 to 1. So kind of the same way that we are used to writing opacity. And this makes a lot of sense because it allows that to kind of shift and grow with whatever comes in the future. We're not limited to exactly like 1 to 255, right? Like that can be, you know, whatever's between 0 and 100%. So in this case, if we wanted a color that was like 100% pure red, we'd say color, display P3, 1, 0, 0. So 100% red, no green, no blue. This method is nice. I think it makes a lot of sense because it's a pretty similar syntax to like what we're already used to. So there's no big adjustments that need to be made on the developer side. There's not a lot of learning. It's pretty easy to like, yeah, just to shift over. The mental model is pretty much the same. However, some argue that in the long run, it's actually a little bit less useful since that RGB approach to defining color is actually pretty unintuitive when you think about it. Like we've gotten used to it because we've kind of had to get used to it. That's just one of the best ways to write color that's available to us right now. But when you think about actually trying to visualize a color, like if you say, I want this to be light pink, and then you try to mentally convert that into an RGB value, like it's kind of hard. You could kind of take a guess, but you're unlikely to be able to get the color that you want the first time if you just take a stab at writing RGB numbers without any kind of like color generator or anything that allows you to like pick a color visually and then shows you the RGB numbers. And it's pretty difficult even then to like fine tune it. So if you're looking at a color, like let's say you do manage that light pink and then you're like, you know, this would actually be better if it was a little bit more like lavender, but like a darker lavender, you know? And so you want to make an adjustment, but just a slight adjustment. What RGB values, like how do you shift the numbers in an RGB style definition to make something darker? You know, it's not built to do that. So you pretty much have to go back to some kind of color selection tool, adjust the color there, derive a new RGB color value, copy that into your code, see how it looks. Is that really what you wanted? Well, no, actually, you did kind of want it a little bit darker. Back to the color generator. It's a little bit of a pain in the ass, honestly. So some of the other ways that we're looking at changing the syntax is a little bit more intuitive, something that lines better with the way that we actually think about colors and the way that we want to adjust and work with colors when we're writing them. So quick break, because I've been just ranting. But welcome. This is Dev by Design. Usually in Dev by Design, we talk about kind of design fundamentals for a developer audience with the goal of helping you level up your UIs and make better designs. Today, we are taking like a little bit of a pause to talk about something tangential. We're talking today about the future of color in CSS. So we're kind of taking all of the color-based stuff, all of the knowledge that we've been diving deep on for the last few weeks, and we're translating that into CSS, and we're looking at what's coming up next. Because after all, it is Dev by Design. So once every few weeks, we get to talk about something a little more devy, right? But diving back in, another option of P3 color definition that is coming to us is the lab syntax. So that looks like this. And I know this looks confusing at first, but hang with me because we're going to make it make sense. So the lab syntax is a method for defining colors based on lightness and color channels. In fact, that is what the L in lab stands for. It stands for lightness. It stands for lightness, color channel A, and color channel B. So as you can see here, this is what we're talking about. This is lightness here in the middle. And then this is color channel A, green to red, and this is color channel B, blue to yellow. So lightness is defined on a scale from 0 to 100%, with 0 being like completely dark, black, and 100% being the lightest that it can go, totally white. The color channels work a little bit differently. So in this case, instead of going from like 0 to 100, they are defined as a value between two ends of a spectrum. So that goes from minus 128 to 127, which, spoiler alert, is a total spectrum of 255. It's all coming back around, right? You can kind of see this here. This far end is minus 128. This far end is 127. You'll be defining a color somewhere along the spectrum here, from one end to another. So in both situations, like 0 is the exact middle, right? So if you wanted like a perfect gray, it would be like 50, 0, 0. You'd be defining the 50% here on your lightness, the 0 here in the middle of your channel B, and the 0 in the middle of your channel A. So yeah, if you picture that like X shape here that's in the middle with the red being one crossbar and the blue and the yellow being another, the lab syntax allows us to kind of plot a color on that graph, with that middle being able to tell you the lightness. So that makes a little bit more sense in that we can see it a little bit more clearly. It kind of aligns with the color wheel. You know, you can kind of imagine how those colors work and where you would kind of plot on this axis here, right? And then, of course, making things lighter and darker becomes a breeze. And that's a huge part of what we're usually doing, is just making tweaks to that like value, right? We want something that's like a little bit lighter. We want a tint. We want something that's a little bit darker. We want a tone. And the lab syntax makes that a lot more accessible. However, I don't think that it is my personal favorite. We'll talk about that one kind of coming up here. So this, let me get this all on the screen. This is the LCH color syntax. So it works similarly, but not exactly the same as the lab syntax. The L is still for brightness, and that scale still works exactly the same way. It still has that kind of center line here, for lack of a better word. When you like visualize the model of how this works, there's that lightness that still happens. However, the next two values are different. Instead of that like A channel, B channel, we have C for chroma and then H for hue. So chroma is like the saturation or the intensity of the color, with 0 being like totally neutral gray and 132, which is the max value, being like the most vivid color possible, right? So hue, as you probably know from our earlier discussions about color and color theory, hue is the word we use to describe like the color itself. So it works on a scale from 0 to 360, which is like a perfect representation of the color wheel. So you can define a color kind of based exactly where it would be on the wheel. We kind of have our 0 starting over here, and then it works this way all the way around. So once you kind of have that model and you know where 0 starts, you can get a pretty close approximation of the color that you want without having to go back to some kind of a color generator in the way that we used to with the RGB. And then because you can adjust the lightness and the chroma values, again, kind of in a more intuitive way, it just makes sense. I find it incredibly intuitive, right? So those L and C values correlate to the brightness and saturation kind of controls. And that's something that we've become really used to. We see that with like Instagram filters or like color picker UI tools. It's stuff that we're used to. We're used to those terms. We're used to thinking about colors in that way. So if you want to play around with it a little bit, let's take a look. There's a really good LCH color picker here. It won't let me drag that into there. Weird. This is a really good LCH color picker that I think can help get a feel for how this model works. But then once you have it, the nice thing about LCH is that I don't think you need these kinds of websites anymore. Once you've got a real solid feel for what each attribute controls, you can start to make those adjustments completely on your own without having to go back and reference. So we see here, we've got LCH written, right? So here's our lightness, here's our chroma, here's our hue, and then we've got a slash here, and then the alpha, which controls, of course, the transparency. Underneath, you can see this is being converted to the old school RGB approach. However, we get this warning underneath. So this is telling us like, hey, this color isn't actually in the sRGB gamut. This isn't really available to you yet. We've done our best to approximate, but it's not going to look right. Whoa. And then, yeah, under here we get, this is the other ways that we talked about, like P3 approach, and then here it is in Rec 2020. So let's take a look. Let's say we want something that is 100% solid. I'm going to set this at just like a middle value for now. And now we get to pick a hue from anywhere on the color wheel. I'm going to choose like a nice blue. And then we can adjust our chroma, which again, keep in mind is the saturation of the color. So as we bring it down, we can see it kind of gray out. Something that I think is worth noting, once we're up in here, you notice that you can kind of stop seeing the difference on my screen. Like I'm moving this slider and we're seeing the numbers change, but the color doesn't look different. That's because this level of intensity is outside of the sRGB color gamut. We're fully into like P3 or maybe even Rec 2020 colors right now. So nothing's happening here, and we've got these warnings, and that's why, because we're looking at colors not even possible for us yet, but soon. Once we get back in See here, there's the line where we step out of sRGB. From here under, every time I move the slider, you can see the adjustment in the color. And that's because this is what we currently have access to. But won't it be so cool? There's a whole half of this slider that we can't even see right now. It's not supported on our monitors. I like that, obviously. That's what gets me fired up, is the idea that there's all these colors out there and we haven't been able to show them, right? We're just stuck. We didn't even realize we were stuck, and we're stuck. But this new color spectrum is coming, and it's going to allow us to create brighter, more vivid, more compelling colors. It's going to bring new depth and new levels of contrast to our design. It's going to unlock, God, just so much possibility. I'm thrilled. It's okay if you're not thrilled. I'm thrilled about P3 colors. The idea to me that we've just been working in like half of this bar and we're about to get a whole nother half. So cool. That's so awesome. Anyway, you can start to get a feel here for how the LCH values work. And once you've got that, you can start to create LCH colors without necessarily needing that visual reference. And the ability to just kind of look here and go like, well, this is pretty good, but I would actually like a color that's like a little bit brighter. I wonder if this will let me change it here. No. Okay. I was hoping it would just let me type. But if I know, like, all right, I really want my color to be a lighter blue. I want to change that first value to 70%. I already have a pretty good feeling of what I'm going to get before I even click on that, right? Or if I say, like, this is nice, but actually, I want it a little bit more muted. I'm really going for, like, a muted pastel tones thing. I'm going to bring down my chroma. I can just do that. I don't even need to know exactly. I can fiddle with that number and know exactly what will change in a way that we were not able to do with RGB values in the same way. And yeah, as we talked about a little bit, of course, we still have access to our alpha values just with that little slash afterwards, and then working the same way that it always has on a scale from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%. That can be appended to the end of any of these new CSS syntaxes by just adding a slash after those values within the parentheses. So we see that here. When we have it all the way at 100%, we can just define our colors with the LCH, or this works exactly the same way down here with like the P3 colors. Define our colors and then throw a slash in there and then add our percentage, and we get the alpha version. Super nice, super easy. I think it's great to have all of that kind of bundled in a syntax that is the same across all styles of color definition. I think it makes a lot of sense. So here's the part with the bad news. Now that I've gotten you all like super hyped and we've taken a look at this and we've talked about how much better it is and how much cooler it is and how much more intuitive it is than what we have right now. Of course, the bad news with future tech is that we don't have it yet. We can't start using this. This stuff has only very recently been finalized within the CSS specs. So it's a good thing. It means that when P3 color is widely adopted, the CSS is already going to be there to support it. We don't have to do this whole like catch-up game situation. So good, but also most browsers right now don't support the P3 color gamut. As of right now, you can use Color, Lab, and LCH in Safari in like, I want to say versions 15 plus. Let's see. Let's do a quick little can I use. But yeah, Safari is really leading the pack on this, which is cool, honestly, because that's not something that we see a lot, frankly. But Safari is really leading the color innovation. I think that has to do with, of course, their ties to Apple and Apple's support for wider color support on their screens. So it makes a lot of sense that if Apple is going to be promoting these devices that have this like wide gamut color spectrum, that Safari then needs to support that. So we're seeing them lead the rush. Hopefully that means that we'll see some pressure on Chrome and Firefox to pick those up relatively soon. Because yeah, iOS support totally fine. We see Safari on desktop right now only has it in their technology preview. So that means it's coming. We'll probably get it in the next version of Safari, like standard. Unfortunately, nada on Chrome and Firefox, not even in their like Firefox Nightly, their developer browsers. Let's take a peek. Let's see what Lab is looking like. Lab's the same way. And LCH, I believe it's going to be exactly the same. Oh, these are together. Haha. They are exactly the same. So, coming, not here yet. Suffice to say, it is definitely happening. Anytime we see Apple kind of pick that up, I would bet the first like big keynote or whatever that we have where Apple wants to brag about their wide gamut color support, their like deep color support, we will all of a sudden start to see the other browsers go like, oh yeah, we need to get on that. We need to get on some P3 colors. That being said, it is fully supported in Safari on your iOS devices, and it's supported in Safari Technology Preview. So if you wanted to start playing around with it, you can do that. You don't even necessarily need to like turn on any experimental flags if you're using it on your mobile device. You just kind of get it, which is cool. In fact, there are some really, really good P3 color tools that are being built into the Safari Web Inspector panel. Jen Simmons actually did a really good overview video that's over here on her Twitter. Obviously, it won't make you like watch the whole video with me on stream, but it's really cool, and I will share it in the comments if you're interested in checking it out yourself. But it makes it a lot easier to kind of like troubleshoot and play around with some of those new P3 colors. And I think it's going to give Safari a real edge. Browser puns. I think it's going to give them a real edge over the competition because we're not seeing this kind of support in the other browsers just yet. And I think when we see those kind of wider spectrum colors adopted, there will be a little bit of a catch-up game that the other browsers have to do. It's, yeah, again, really, really interesting to me that we're seeing Safari lead the pack here. And that hasn't necessarily been the case in other places. So like one of the things later today, Alyssa and I will be talking about Cascade Layers, which is cool. And here we see that like Safari is actually kind of lagging a little bit. So like Cascade Layers are fully supported in the other two major browsers. Safari's got them supported, but only in their technology preview. So interesting to me that like this has been kind of swapped with the colors, and we're seeing Safari lead the pack. Just cool. So of course, with this being future tech, if we want to start using it, we need to talk about fallbacks. So if you want to start using P3 colors right now, which isn't necessarily a bad idea because that means you can get ahead of the curve with your application or your website so that when those colors drop, you're already set and you're already taking advantage of the cool new thing. You can set that fallback right now for your users who are using like browsers or hardware that don't support the new colors, right? We're going to get a new color gamut media query. And you can see right now, we are actually having pretty solid support for that. So Firefox is a little bit behind the game, but that's been in Chrome for the last several versions. Edge has it. Edge has it. When does Edge have anything? Safari, of course, has it. Opera even has it. I mean, there's a lot of green bars. So anyway, we can use this color gamut media query, and that allows you to like check the user's browser and the output device for current color compatibility. You can pass in whether you're using sRGB, P3, Rec 2020, whatever, and it'll check. I think the really nice thing here is that it is checking both the device and the browser support. So, right, like if you, even when Chrome has P3 color support, if you're using a device that doesn't have that wide gamut color support, it's not going to matter. And actually, there's a very similar conversation happening in the comments right now. Fuel notes Chrome colors on my machine look really dull, and was wondering whether that's a Chrome thing or a computer thing. Someone jumps in and says, that's likely your monitor. And right now, I would agree. Yeah, a lot of this, we might start to see some of that when we're in this shift and P3 colors are like more, ooh, that's interesting. Firefox looks amazing. I'm so curious now why this is happening to you. Because right now, color support is pretty much the same, right? So like those P3 colors aren't in use yet. P3 color support, can't type. Oh yeah, so that's WebKits, right? This is not, we're not going to get it until we get the stuff included in CSS level 4, right? WebKit has had it really early, but right, yeah. WebKit is the only browser engine that supports display P3 color as of January 2020, and that was a minute ago. So we haven't seen a huge shift since then, though. Yeah, a lot of speculation right now. But as you can see, like even when I'm looking for this, articles are like 2020, 2017, 2021. That's closer at least. 2020, 2017, 2021. We've known this is coming, but it's not here yet. So I would say right now, if you're seeing differences browser to browser, maybe there's some kind of user settings thing happening, but all colors should be rendered in the same way right now because we don't actually have P3 color support yet. But that's an interesting problem, and I'm trying to not think about it now so that I can keep talking about the stuff that we were meant to talk about and not completely side rail. Ooh, I read an interesting article on how to emulate HDR. I would be really interested to read that. If you could drop that in the comments, I'm interested. Everything looks vibrant except chromium-based stuff. Weird. That is so weird. I have no idea. Good luck. Godspeed. Jumping back over to color gamut. So it's going to be written just like a media query right now, right? So we have this at media, and then instead of where we might have previously put like sizes or whatever to create breakpoints, you can now write color gamut and then the type of color, right? And this is full support right now, sRGB. You can conditionally render colors based on whether or not they have color gamut support for whatever color spectrum you're trying to use. So if you want to start writing right now, you can start building in these media queries. Just make sure that you have one for sRGB, because sRGB is what's being used right now. So you want to double up and have something like color gamut P3 with the color that you would like it to be ideally, and then follow up with the color gamut sRGB with your fallback color. Like we said, there are websites like this color picker that will help you adapt down. They'll give you kind of as close as is possible right now with this warning. So you can use something like that to adjust, or just by eye, you can pick a color that you would rather it be. You might even be able to see, I would be tempted to do something really cool and experimental here and create like 2 completely different color schemes. So that if someone has P3 colors, they're getting something like wild and fun and vibrant. And if they have sRGB colors, they're getting like blah. I think it would be really fun. You can also do basically the same thing using the like @supports syntax, which you can do for all sorts of things. So that, of course, I'm talking about this @supports. So you can, whoop, that wasn't what I meant to click. I thought it would link us to the MDN docs on @supports. But if you're not familiar with @supports, they work again kind of similarly to media queries, where you can @supports and then just include whatever piece of CSS you're hoping to write, and then conditionally render based on that, which is a really neat trick as well, and one that I think is, I'm going to go ahead and say, underused, because I think there's also some cool things that you can do with ad supports. You can even get it in JavaScript with your CSS supports rule. So definitely a handy way. There are less and less things that fall into that, like graceful degradation category. I feel like that's something that I used to have to do. Used to have to do it literally all the time, right? Like, and the idea of graceful degradation and progressive enhancement was something that we were all talking about all the time. And now less and less of a thing. Browsers are keeping pace with each other better. And we're seeing less of these gaps where something is available to like 3/4 of your users, but not the people on IE. So great, a relief. But in the rare occasion that you still have to do that, ad supports. So as if you couldn't tell from my like extremely excited ranting for the last 45 minutes, these kinds of like tech advances are my favorite part of being a developer. Like, I really love this feeling of being on the cutting edge and knowing what's happening and getting to do things with technology that we literally could not do before. And to me, this idea of like a whole spectrum of colors that we couldn't display on monitors before being accessible to us now is just, God, that is so cool. We're going to be able to create so much cool stuff. I know that sometimes it can feel really frustrating that everything moves so fast. And sometimes it can feel kind of difficult to make peace with that knowledge that like, I just learned something like a year or 2 years ago and it's already outdated. Like, what the heck? So it comes with some of its own frustration as well. But like in the same breath, I feel just so very lucky to be able to work in a field that is like growing and improving and expanding like this, and to get to be part of the people who help define it, right? And who help create with it and help shape the future of where it's going. That is just, that lights me up. As a huge design nerd, this new color gamut support, obviously super excited about. I think that the more intuitive approach to defining colors is going to make a really huge difference to the way that developers work with colors. I think previously a lot of the kind of design choices and limitations that we've seen have been shaped by the fact that it's just really freaking hard to work with colors in CSS. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of that like back and forth between like looking at something in a color generator and then going back and then tweaking it in the color generator and then copying it back and then check and then don't and then like, so the ability to, within the like CSS definition itself, be able to just like tweak numbers a little bit up, a little bit down, and get the kind of color that we want, I think is going to make this a lot more accessible to developers who don't necessarily like have every freaking hex code memorized. Because right, like that's the other approach to defining colors is hex colors. And I know that there's sense behind it. Like, in fact, there was a really cool article that I read somewhere about a guy who was colorblind and had learned the methodology behind hex colors in order to more effectively work with colors. And while I admire that, I simply am not doing it myself. Let me see if I can find his thing. Yeah. Oh, is this guy? It was so cool. Right. So he had like talked about his whole method of learning the way that hex codes are generated and then breaking down like how they're computed and then being able to adjust them, right? Like, but this is a lot. Like, I'm scrolling through it now, and like this whole transcript is what it took to kind of break down the way that hex colors are used. I'm throwing it in the chat because it's cool. Definitely, like, you should read it. It's amazingly impressive, right? And so, yeah, right here he's talking about some of those same changes, right? So making it lighter, making it darker, making it less saturated, changing the hue. Those are the main things that developers want to do working with colors, right? Like, those are the main things anyone wants to do working with colors. And he's kind of figured out how to do it. He's got this kind of shorthand that he uses. Makes total sense. But when you compare that with like LCH, where all of that is just built into the syntax from the beginning, right? Change the lightness, change the darkness, change the hue, change the saturation. Boom. Like everything that he had to figure out doing with all of this content, it's just built right into LCH selection. It is, that's great. That's going to be so great. And yeah, now that we're seeing P3 color support in Safari, I would bet, and most people are speculating, that we will get full modern browser support within about the next year. Now that the first one has the first domino has fallen, we'll see the others. It will probably be motivated by hardware, as we talked about before. With Safari kind of leading the pack, we're anticipating kind of Apple devices making use of P3 color really soon. And once that drops, the rest are going to have to follow because Apple is such an industry giant. So very exciting. Very, very cool. Some more chat in the comments. Heck yes. Some new psychedelic shaders. The colors, that is kind of, as we talked about a little bit, the colors that are coming are increasing in vibrancy. So it's going to be this stuff out here. So colors will seem lighter and brighter and more saturated. So yeah, you're going to get some real psychedelic stuff. And yeah. Oh, good question. What is the difference between LCH and ASV? It's a good question because everybody kind of hates those, right? Like very, very, very rarely do you see colors defined with LCH or HSV because they're kind of even less intuitive than the methods that we have now. Yeah. What, why, and how? LCH. Oh, wait. Speaking about being less of. Boop, boop, boop. That is not what I wanted. Do. So yeah. HSV was made for basically different approaches. And it talks about it a little bit here. It is more accurate to the way that we write colors and the way that we perceive colors, but it doesn't play as well with the RGB like computer approach. So we see it used more. Yeah, and here it calls it out. You see it used more for paint or ink. It works really well with that. It has historically not played as well with RGB in terms of like translating one-to-one. But these new syntaxes are kind of, because they've been built from the ground up and it's not like another way to work with the technology limitations that were already in place. So yeah, that's the main difference. HSV was primarily created for print use. So, but I would agree in terms of the like structure, the syntax, in terms of the way that they work, they're both really similar. And some people do like them a lot, right? Yeah, use it. I use it a lot. Yep, because it's easier to predict and tweak the colors. Yes, totally. And that's a lot of where these new color models are coming from. So LCH for sure, and even LAB is moving in really good directions in that regard in terms of being able to see the colors and adjust the colors without having to go back to some kind of a third-party color picker or a visualizer like this to have to make adjustments to the color. It's coming. You can use HSV right now for sure, but some people find that there is a discrepancy between what they've described in HSV and what they see. Obviously, everything is actually in RGB. Like when we're actually looking at a screen, we're looking at those RGB pixels, right? So like these guys. So that's kind of why RGB has historically won. It's because it's a way to like write colors natively, quote unquote. It aligns perfectly with the way that hardware was rendering colors. Now, with OLED screens and all of that, this is not exactly the same anymore, right? So it gives us a little bit more freedom to step outside this RGB mold. So hopefully that answered your question. That's why. But all right, y'all, that is just about our hour for today. I really appreciate you guys jumping on. I know it's been a minute since we've done a dev by design just because of schedules and things and craziness happening in the world. So we meaning Progress, the Code It Live team, is back on our regular streaming schedules, which means that you can catch us at all of our normal times. In fact, Alyssa and I will be back on in, let's see, at 2 o'clock. Can I do math? It's 11, 3 hours. Alyssa and I will be back on in 3 hours at 2 o'clock. We're going to be talking about CSS Cascade Layers. It's going to be super cool. 3 hours from now. Yes, so it is in my time, almost 11 a.m. Eastern time. We will be back on at 2 o'clock Eastern time. So 3 hours from this very minute, we'll be back on talking about Cascade Layers. We're going to do like a little tutorial. We're going to play with it a little. It's going to be really cool. Cascade Layers just now has full modern browser support. So it is something that you can use right away, unlike everything that we talked about today. So jump back in if you want to get a glimpse of some future CSS that's a little bit more current. So thank you guys. I hope you guys have a great day. It was really good to be back on. It was really good to hang out with y'all. I will see you later.